and welcome. Welcome to the last and final day of the summit. My name is Karen, and I have the honor of presenting today's session on the role of international cooperation in safeguarding human rights in a more divided and uncertain world. As I prepared for today's presentation, one question kept coming back to me. How can we create real change and sustainable peace when we only begin to value human rights after the abuses and conflicts have already unfolded? Far too often, human rights are addressed in hindsight. This reactive mindset leaves us trapped in cycles of violence and regret, when what we need is a proactive approach that safeguards human rights at all times and cultivates our shared humanity, compassion, and sense of community. As we speak, millions around the world are living through conflict, displacement, and oppression. From Ukraine to Sudan, Gaza to Haiti, human rights violations have become a daily reality for far too many. Behind these crises lie unresolved grievances, unhealed traumas, and systematic injustices that result in recurring violence. But here's the thing about fractured times like this. They challenge us to reimagine what's possible. History shows us that even in the most difficult circumstances, change is within our grasp, if only we have the courage to act. Take Colombia as an example. For over 5 decades, communities have endured violence and widespread human rights violations in the midst of a complex conflict. Yet through dialogue, key actors have taken ambitious steps towards peace, reconciliation, and justice for victims. Grassroots peace-building initiatives have further created critical spaces for dialogue and reintegration. While the challenges in the country are far from over, these efforts have demonstrated that collaboration and inclusive peace-building approaches can yield progress. But they also highlight an essential truth. Peace and human rights are not one-time achievements. They're fragile, ongoing processes that require continuous nurturing and long-term commitment. This is why cooperation matters. Governments, international organizations, NGOs, grassroots initiatives, and peace builders who understand the lived realities of those most affected must work together to address root causes, maintain accountability, and build systems for sustainable peace and human rights. To help us navigate these critical and complex questions, we are honored to hear from Agnès Callamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International. Callamard has dedicated her career to defending human rights, ensuring accountability, and amplifying the voices of those too often silenced or marginalized. From serving as UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions to her leadership at Amnesty, she has championed justice and equality. We're also privileged today to have a moderator, Antoine, Director of Advocacy and Assistance at Reporters sans Frontières and PSIA faculty. An expert in human rights, international justice, and NGO work, he brings invaluable knowledge and experience to guide our discussion today. I invite you all to join the conversation by using the QR code. And now, please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest with a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks a lot. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Put me. Hello. And guess what? We had an amazing guest today because Agnès is not any actor. Agnès is a fighter. She is thinking. She is reflecting. She is acting. And the key word for Agnès, I would say, and I've known Agnès for a little time, is commitment, action, togetherness. Togetherness. Today we are to brainstorm about international cooperation for human rights. What a backbone we have here. This takes us back to the UN Charter. I'm speaking here under the control of Melissa Fleming. You know, we have Melissa with us, and Melissa incarnates the UN system, right? And the key question for us, and this will be my first question to Agnès, is, are we now in the same times as 1945, 1948 with UDHR, when international cooperation was enshrined into the Charter, Article 55, Article 56, as the key instrument to achieve one of the key goals of that cooperation system, the UN, Article 1, Paragraph 3, promoting respect, effectiveness for human rights. That was the idea of the times. Agnès, where are we now? Where do we depart from if we want to think, and this will be the second question, from now on, forward, where are we now?
Thank you very much for welcoming me. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be engaging with you on this very important topic, I will say the topic of the decade. So I think the first message I would like to make is that we are living an era of historical transformation. This is not just any kind of changes. I think we are moving into a new era, a change of era, and you mentioned the 1948 system with the Bretton Woods institution and so on. There is absolutely no doubt that we are entering something new, something else. Now, it was precipitated by some events, including the new election of Donald Trump, including Russia's aggression of Ukraine, including Israel's genocide in Gaza. It was precipitated by those events, but it is not just a product of those events. I think any person who has observed the international system for a decade or two could point to the various moments where progressively we have let go. We have let go of the UN Charter. We have allowed all of those institutions and the glue that brought us together to melt, to be eaten progressively, but very surely, I will say. So that's the first point. It's definitely a new era that we are entering. I think the second point I would like to make is that if you want to have an historical comparison, and I was in Davos with your dean last week, and the comparison that came back all the time was the same one, 1948. We're back into a 1948 moment. And I have to tell you that is not how I see it. I think we're into a 1930s moment. But to imagine for one moment, for 1 second, that we can escape what happened between the 1930s and 1948, I think is very optimistic and will demand a maturity that I don't know whether the international community is capable of. So I just would like to deliver that second rather gloomy and dark message, that when you hear people tell you, oh, we are in a new 1948 moment, you've got to be very clear in your head that this is a very optimistic version. And I don't think my version is pessimistic. I think we are in a 1930s moment, and it is up to us to determine how we're going to move to 1948. That's it. That's the historical choice we have to make. But we are not in 1948. Why am I saying that we are not in 1948? Because there is no plan. There is nothing stable. We're destroying, we're not creating. When I say we, I don't mean we here. I do mean governments that have progressively eaten at what was built in 1948, thinking that a little bite won't harm. But so many bites have created a complete imbalance and disequilibrium, and it's now falling. It's almost losing its initial shape. So there has been progressive biting into the system, and what has happened over the last few years with Russia's aggression of Ukraine, which is a very clear determination that the UN Charter does not hold and does not apply to them because they have security issues or because they don't like NATO, followed by what happened in Gaza with the real annihilation of international humanitarian law. All of those things have precipitated the demise of that system. And that's where we are now.
Can I just ask you, because you say we should look back. This is not just from one day to the other. Do you date this from 24 February 22 or back to 9/11?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there has been precipitating, like in a chemistry. You put something and there is a big reaction. That's what happened with Russia aggression and with, but before you got there, as I have said, for the last decade or 2 decades, governments have progressively eaten at the system, thinking nothing could really, it could not be killed. And I think that was a very wrong appreciation of the fragility of our international system. 9/11 was certainly an important moment where the war on terror and has announced a progressive weakening of basic principle under international law, basic principle around territorial integrity, and so on and so forth. So it has been much more progressive, but there have been precipitating factors, and that's where we are at now. That's why, because of the seriousness of the crisis, I think we need to be very aware of the challenge. And the challenge is not just a challenge of creation, which, and being optimistic. It's a challenge as well of avoiding the worst, avoiding the community, the global community, falling into what happened in the 1930s. We need to be fully aware that every step that we take right now could precipitate us into the bottom of the abyss. And I mean it, I do mean what I say, that we are extremely vulnerable to the worst possible outcome. And it's going to require the maturity and the dedication and historical vision of everyone, including young people, students, to make us walk around that abyss.
Okay, now, so when you look at today and try to reflect from yesterday to move forward, there is this very dark and realistic analysis. However, also knowing you a little, I can't believe that you don't see some signs of resistance.
Yeah. It's not an end project. There is nobody right now who is thinking, oh gosh, I want a new World War II. I mean, a few maybe, but I think that's the thing that is protecting us. No one is actually having as vision the abyss. That's one thing. Whether or not we can avoid it, I don't know. But I'm not sure there are too many leaders who are looking for the abyss, and that's a good thing. It is a period of extreme insecurity and instability, there is no doubt. And it does mean that, why? Because everybody is trying to move around to maximize what they can get. And to move around in a way that they can benefit from whatever the new world system will deliver. And that means all of us. All of us have a role to play because this is not an end project. We're not in an end project situation at all. That's why it's not 1948. Because I hope that no one really wants to precipitate the world at the bottom of the abyss, it gives us opportunity. The challenges are very high, and I think if you don't mind, I just want to highlight some of them so that we know what we need to look at. The rise of international conflict, I'm sure you are studying that for the last 5 years or so, we have moved from internationalized local conflict to something much more like international conflict. We are witnessing rising inequality. It has been around since the financial crisis, but there is absolutely no sense of it going down. In fact, all the global data are showing quite the opposite. So rising inequality within state and between state. Rising inequality is the most important driver for conflict and lack of social cohesion. We are witnessing retrenchment practices. Okay, under Donald Trump, removing from WHO the attacks on UNRWA, another UN agency, the failure to properly fund the UN and the system right now. We are witnessing a surge of humanitarian needs, and that's something you're very familiar with. The possible tariff over trade. I know you've had the WTO Director General, and she's really hoping that we can avoid a tit-for-tat scenario. But whether or not this is going to work, we'll have to see. And of course, we're witnessing attacks on civil and political rights. So all the checks and balances within national societies are being undermined. Media, civil society, universities, any forms of political dissent is increasingly not tolerated very well. And while some of those conflicts may occur in private spheres, it also occurs in the public one. So, key states are removing themselves from key agreements, key treaties, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, are the scenarios. That's the situation that we are confronting. So when we want to think about international cooperation and to reimagine a new system, we need to be absolutely aware of what we need to tackle. How do we tackle rising inequality? Because if we don't tackle it, we are not going to build social cohesion. We are not going to build a cooperation where everyone will get something out of it. We're going to build submission. We're going to build tit for tat. We're going to build instability, but not cooperation. So the fact that inequality is increasing, to me, is extremely worrisome. We need to look at which UN treaties do we want to preserve as a matter of survival. If we had to prioritize, what is it that we should prioritize? Clearly, the fact that the US is withdrawing from COP, from the Paris Agreement, is extremely, not that it was working so well to begin with in any case, but it was better than nothing. And we cannot tackle the climate insecurity on our own. It's got to be a collective, joint process, And the key climate change drivers removing themselves from the agreement, basically, it's breaking the agreement. So what do we need to do in order to protect it? What kind of treaty do we want to protect? What kind of international cooperation system do we need to survive so that we can avoid falling into the abyss?
So we understand that effective cooperation implies that some conditions are met, some prerequisites are needed, and we understand that today it's not the case in many fields. And there's a huge, huge problem. Again, however, in some fields, isn't there some space for something to happen and tools for resistance to proceed, to build? And while I'm asking this question, I'm just telling our students, please be ready with your questions because it's 29, so soon you will be able to engage conversation with Agnès, like usually from the 2 mics, and you can line up behind the mics, please. So, Agnès.
Absolutely. So, you know, from my perspective, as the head of a civil society organization, I am absolutely determined to see that period of instability and insecurity, one during which we cannot be silent and we cannot be unseen. And I would like to invite everyone to do so. Yes, it's an extremely unequal battlefield. You have some governments with extraordinary economic and military power that are battling right now. And it may seem sometimes that we are so little compared to it. But, you know, some of the best machine can be stopped by just a little grain of sand. So there is no reason why we could not be that little grain of sand. Who would have imagined the Arab Spring, for instance? It may not have delivered what we wanted, but you know, it just, we cannot underestimate what people who are desperate, people who are determined, and people who are angry can deliver. So that's my point of departure. I want to see that period as one during which civil society, students, media play their role. From my standpoint, from the standpoint of Amnesty International, it's first and foremost a matter of supporting those who are going to resist, whether they are government or whether they are other civil society actors or university professors or students. It's important that there cannot be anyone left alone. You know, I think networking, building cooperation within our own community, globally or locally, is going to be crucial. So no one should be facing the repression on their own, and we need to be present. So it's an act of support and an act of resistance. In terms of building, the fact that we want to resist the destruction does not mean that we believe that everything needs to be preserved. I think everyone understands that the 1948 system delivered quite a lot, yes, but not, you know, it is not a panacea for everything we are confronting. And there are many things that needed to be improved. So it's really important for us all to reflect on what it is about that system that need to be preserved. That is so essential that we cannot imagine a world post whatever we are in now without those fundamental principles. And the speakers, I think Karen mentioned human rights. It's values. It's moral values. It's knowing what's right, what's wrong. It's enshrining these values into some kind of system, we call it international law, so that they can be adjudicated. So I think those values matter a great deal. They are values around the universality of our rights, the fact that you cannot begin to imagine a system that will be grounded on superiority, whether racial or class or ethnic or gender. It's that basic. We cannot get rid of that principle, even though right now people are trying to do that, just that. But that to me is fundamental. It's something that we need to fight for. It's something that was there in 1948. It's a beautiful legacy out of the ashes of Holocaust and World War II, and we cannot give that away. in spite of Donald Trump. So, and everyone else in France, it's about the right of the most vulnerable, the right of the migrants, the rights of the refugees, the right of the transgender, whoever is going to be attacked on the basis that they are subhuman. The right of the Palestinians, if you are in Israel, the right of the Jews, because they are also under attack. So those fundamental principles, we cannot let go of them. We simply cannot let go of them. They must be carried into that new world. The institutions, that I think is much more open to discussions. How can we make them more equitable? There is quite a lot of proposal around the financial architecture. I'm sure Donald Trump and his partners will try to get rid of that, but they are there. They are great proposals. We already have gone through an effort of reimagining the system through the Summit for the Future just in September. That has really interesting stuff. The reform of the Security Council. Can we imagine peace and security without something whose responsibility will be to raise the alarm and to have binding impact? No, I think we need something along those lines. Doesn't mean that we need the 5 Ps Security Council. It doesn't mean that we need a right of veto, at least not the way it's being implemented. It means that it needs to be more inclusive and more effective. So that too, I think, needs to be rethought, but don't necessarily need to be destroyed. International Criminal Court, yeah, it did not deliver a great deal, frankly. You know, 5 people indicted before Ukraine and Gaza for 20 years. That's very, But do we need to shall we get rid of it? No. We need to reform it. It's strategically and symbolically a testament of our commitment to international justice. But it also means we've got to be committed to reform it or to create other international justice institutions that can give something to the millions of victims around the world who cannot get justice through the International Criminal Court. International Court of Justice is doing wonderful stuff right now. Thank you to South Africa. So suddenly everyone knows about the ICJ. But before the South Africa case on Israel genocide, there was the case on the right to a clean environment. There are some fantastic rulings that have come out of the International Court of Justice. So it doesn't mean that it's sufficient. It doesn't mean that it cannot be revisited, but it also doesn't mean that it must be destroyed. And I think the message I want to deliver is that in this setting, in the academic world, I think you have the space and the opportunity, I will say, to do that exercise of both strategic and creative. What do we need to avoid falling into the abyss? What do we need to bring along with us? What needs to be reformed? How should it be reformed? On the basis of which principle? What kind of world do we want, basically? You know, in 2048, where do you want to live?
Thank you very much, Agnès. Thank you. So, turning to you now, we are very lucky to have 20 minutes for interaction with our guests, so please get closer to the mics. And would you start, please?
Yes, of course. What an honor to have you here. Thank you for your insights.
Do you mind just introducing yourself?
Oh, yes, of course.
Thanks.
I am Elena Kloppe, and I am studying international governance and diplomacy in my first year. What really stuck to me was you mentioning that we live in the 1930s right now. I'm a German-Greek student, and of course for me this has a specific significance since you might be aware, this week the Conservative Party in Germany broke the cordon sanitaire. So I highly agree with you that we need to avoid the worst case scenario, as you said. Every step that we're taking could lead to the worst case scenario. However, I think as a student, as a teenager, when I developed my interest in international affairs, the word for me seemed very differently. I developed this interest because I thought, yes, we could be, we are living in a time of progress, right? So my question for you is, since this implies we need to recalibrate, where do we channel our energies now? How do we become from the house builders, the civil engineers we thought we would be, to the firefighters? Which fires do we extinguish first? Where do you think lies our impact and our responsibility?
That's a very good question. I wish I could tell you you could all be civil engineers, but yeah, you need to firefight. You know, it's not for me to give you any missions, any fire you want to stop. I think sadly you have a lot of choices, but let me highlight some of the in my view, what are the most worrying trends right now. You need your voice, you need your space, you need to be able to dissent. And if you can't, then you are into a very dark scenario. So anything done by government, very powerful private actors or others to silence you, that must be fought. That must be resisted. That's a role for the firefighter. You cannot allow for academic freedom, press freedom, civil society activism, protest, peaceful protest, freedom of association to be curtailed on bases that are beyond what is tolerated under the law. So, for instance, the criminalization of those who support migrants, it's unacceptable. You do not criminalize those who seek to save lives. You may not agree with what they're doing, but you cannot criminalize what they are doing, and in fact, you should not stop them from doing whatever they are doing. Criminalization of foreign student in the United States that protested that expressed their solidarity with Palestinians, unacceptable. You know, it's a new McCarthyism that we are seeing happening in various parts of the world, including in Europe. And I think you need to do anything and everything. And it's not just for you. You've got to understand that if they can stop someone else from speaking, even if you don't agree with them, next you could be next. And having that understanding is absolutely critical to you. So for me, that's a fundamental fire. It's a fundamental fire. Without it, we're nothing. It's the beginning of the end, basically. So that's what I will recommend. Fight for your voice and that of your neighbor.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to the right, please.
Hi, my name is Elise Van Dyke. I'm a first-year environmental policy student. Thank you so much for the really interesting talk that you gave today. Is this better? Okay. So my question is, you talked about the political oppression, especially in civil society groups. And so I was wondering how that affects your work at Amnesty International. And in conjunction with that, in the age of polarization that we are living in today, how to counteract misinformation, specifically about human rights abuses that we face on a day-to-day basis, and how to reach the people who may not necessarily believe that these are issues that need to be addressed in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take a second question, turning to the left.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kaustubh. I'm a second-year student in the Masters in International Governance and Diplomacy. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your perspective with us. I think my question was very similar to the previous one, so it's good that we can club them together. I think human rights and humanitarian issues are becoming more and more political today, and that, in my opinion, makes the role of organizations like Amnesty International even more important, but at the same time brings a particular set of challenges. For example, I'm from India, and I know that in 2020, Amnesty International was forced to halt its operations in India because of government crackdown and bank accounts being frozen. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about what strategies civil society organizations can employ to promote human rights and continue their work in this highly polarized environment that we're living in right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we can stop here. Yeah.
Thank you. So how are we affected at Amnesty International? First of all, I want to highlight the fact that we are a very large organization and a very old one. We are the biggest human rights organization, so we have a bigger backbone and therefore quite a lot of responsibilities. But we are not a benchmark. We're lucky in many ways. That being said, because we're so big and I will say quite impactful, we are being targeted. So as you mentioned that the Indian government has shut us down and is suing us for millions and millions. While we were at Davos, I was there with the head of Oxfam International, who that particular week was also shut down, and he himself is now being threatened with criminal lawsuit. We have been shut down. I mean, we left Hong Kong. We have, quite a lot of difficulties in a place like Hungary. We've had difficulties in a place like Israel, where we just lost our taxation, our charitable status. We, of course, have a tremendous problem in Venezuela, and so on and so forth. So as an international civil society organization, we are vulnerable to any kind of authoritarian behaviors and practices, and these are becoming so common right now. We can be threatened anywhere, including in the United States, where Amnesty and others are planning for the worst, including losing their charitable status and possibly having their asset frozen under Donald Trump. And these are scenarios that we are working on right now. So they are not just, blue sky or dark sky thinking. They are the actual steps that we are taking, because we know that could happen. So that's how we're being affected. We're being affected at different levels. Very difficult to be, it's not difficult to be impartial. It's difficult for impartiality to be understood in the polarized world we live in. So, every conflict right now, whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's Israel, Palestine, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, everything we do is being looked at with lenses that are not very generous. And we are so easily accused of of siding with one side or the other, when what we do is try to do, well, I was going to say both sides, but even doing both sides now is being attacked, by the way, particularly in certain conflict. If you do both sides, you're being attacked. So being impartial, and that has always been a key value for Amnesty International, is extremely difficult. Holding the line on impartiality, what it means for me is holding the line on the universality of victims and of their rights. It does not mean that we obliterate context and history at all. But there is a moment where we need to acknowledge and recognize that every victim has a right to be recognized as a victim. It can be Israelis in southern Israel on October 7, and Palestinians. I'm always coming back to the example because it has defined my life for the last 14 months. It does not mean that we suggest that there is no history, that there is no context, that, and so on and so forth. But it is important to acknowledge at some point that there is a universal commitment to victims. And to me, it is fundamental. And once you've done that, then you also ground that on a contextual analysis and historical analysis of what's happening. But never forget some victims because they may be on the wrong side. I will say, once you start doing it, you're no longer a human rights organization. You're a solidarity organization, and it's great. We need them. But as a human rights organization, we must really hold on to that. So that's that's one of the reactions to how we navigate the polarization of the world we live in. Re-emphasizing those key principles, talking about them with your colleagues, talking about them with your staff and with your members, and explaining why they matter in a world where people may be more driven by solidarity than by principles. Solidarity to a cause rather than human rights principles. And all of that is fine. But for us, it's important to find a way of navigating that journey, acting in solidarity with people and with victims without forgetting that we must uphold international human rights law and human rights principle. And then, of course, the misinformation, disinformation, however it's being called, is extremely difficult and destructive. Amnesty is attacked right, left, and center every day on social media, on emails, I think we cannot leave the space empty, so my feeling is that we should not react to every attack, but we also need to fill that space. We need to ensure that, that those messages around human rights, whether they are being always heard, is a different question. But we cannot leave the space empty of those messages. That, to me, that's the first step. Then how we do it so that we are well heard and effective, it's almost a daily exercise in reflection and learning, I would say.
Merci. I would have a lot to ask about it, but we need to move forward. I think we're done with the... Yeah, we can take 2 more questions. Please.
Hi. My name is Tal. I'm studying international security here, and I want to extend my thanks to you for taking the time to come here and spend this time with us. The question I have is one related to, I think, the spirit that you can sense amongst a lot of people, a lot of young people especially, which is, if you look around, you can sense a certain disenchantment with a lot of the international order today. A lot of people feel it doesn't represent them. And one of the critiques mounted is that a lot of people feel that the international order as it functions today serves often Western countries. And in those times where it doesn't serve Western countries, they find ways to not adhere to it and not adhere to the laws that they themselves help write. I suppose my question consists of 2 parts, which is, 1, what would you tell these disenchanted people who mount this critique? And which remedies, if any, do you think are needed to combat this?
Thank you very much. We'll take another question, please.
Hi, my name is Anam. I'm a student of political science in the School of Research. Thank you so much for this much-needed conversation that we're having today. So my question is, as you rightly mentioned, about the reform of the institutions such as ICC and ICJ. But as we speak, the ICC is bracing for sanctions from the US right now over the Israeli arrest warrants. So my question is that how do we first defend such institutions and then reform in the presence of such power imbalance, where the law is clearly not the same for all, as my colleague just mentioned, and especially big players like the US, who not only have the massive political power, military power, but also the big tech now is behind them censoring the communication.
Thank you very much, and maybe because we will have a bit more than 5 minutes left, so maybe we can take the third question.
Yes, hi. My name is Nathan Hatchett. I study international governance and diplomacy. I'm from the United States. In today's day and age, we tend to focus very much on like conflicts such as Palestine and Israel, Russia and Ukraine, but there are other human rights violations going on all around the world, such as the famine in Sudan or what's going on in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I'm just curious how you would encourage us young folks to not become tunnel visioned and to continue to keep a globalized and worldly view surrounding international human rights. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's an honor to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So on the disenchanted people, look, I think they are right. You know, the international order did benefit Western countries or some countries. I don't think China had to complain about the system, so it's a bit more mixed than just the West. But yes, it has benefited a number of countries at the expense of others. However, I think the binary approach may not be very helpful. If you look at human rights and civil and political rights, I'm not sure that that binary approach is very helpful. And I think if you speak to the people of Sudan or the people of DRC or the people of Venezuela, they will tell you that actually they believe that the international system has been helpful because it has offered some degree of protection, scrutiny, and response to the repression. So I think putting aside the financial institution, putting aside the Security Council, I think we need to, you know, that's the exercise I was calling on you to do. Don't become too binary. Don't throw the baby with the bathwater, because the only person you're going to support is Donald Trump. You're not going to support the people that you are supposedly representing. The disenchanted people. So I think we really need to be thinking strategically and historically. What do we need to preserve? What do we need to reform? But let's make sure that your action and your words are not instrumentalized by those whose intention is to either destroy the system and then recreate it in a way that will benefit solely their own interest. So I think we need to be very careful. The remedies to that are through cooperation and collective undertaking. It's slow, it's boring, it's not very radical. All of that I get. I was at the Summit for the Future, so you know it's not really a panacea and a bit boring, frankly, the proposal, but it brought everybody, minus one or two people. So if that is a way to do it, there was a reform of the financial architecture, there is a reform of the Security Council. Look, it's through your words that you can make those processes more radical. That will be my recommendation, but be careful with what you're asking for, because you may get it, but it may be far worse than what we had before. On the ICC, and yeah, I mean, this is exactly it. We need to defend and reform. You know, I know this is so annoying because we were in a period where we wanted to radically transform those institutions, decolonize them, and do all of that. What can I tell you? We can try, but I think that if we look at this historical period that we live in, where the economic and military power is concentrated in the hands of an extremely few number of countries, we need to do a cost-benefit analysis of how much we can get and how much we will be able to preserve, given what we are confronting. So, in my view, that's what we have to do. We need to defend the International Criminal Court. We need to defend their right to indict Netanyahu or tomorrow Joe Biden or the French president, whoever. We need to defend their right to be impartial, but we need to acknowledge that this is not sufficient, and that there are more that must be done for justice to be delivered. At Amnesty International, this is one exercise that I have initiated when I started, acknowledging that a lot need to be resisted, but a lot need to be changed. So around international justice, we know that this is not sufficient. The ICC is not sufficient. The ad hoc tribunals are okay, but are not sufficient. What is it that we need to do for the millions of victims right now in Syria? Where are they going to get justice? In the ICC? No, it's not going to happen. There are 2 of them that will get justice. Symbolically important. Is that enough for the others? Those are questions you must ask. Do we need to rethink how we deliver criminal justice? Is it too cumbersome? Are there alternative ways of imagining justice? What do the victim want? What do their family want? All of those are questions that must be animating us if we want to reimagine a justice for the new 21st century. The ICC, the ICJ, it was the 20th century. That goes all the way to now, roughly. Now we need to rethink those things. It doesn't mean we get rid of them. They're there, they're great, they do something. That's not enough. I completely agree with what you are saying around the tunnel vision and so on. I'm sorry, I was always going back to the same two conflict. DRC is, to me, personally and to our organization, is a symbol of everything that is wrong with the international system. It is the largest, by far, largest number of victims over two decades. And, we don't even know how many people lost their life because of the armed conflict and related violence in the DRC. We now have an example of a new aggression. It's territorial annexation, could be at least. It is really shaking the African system, predicated on, whether it's good or not, on the sanctity of the colonial borders. So it could be a huge source of instability on a continent which has huge mining resources, which could be doing well in that era of green. It has the resources that the world needs. So did it in the 19th century. So the scramble for Africa, I can see that happening with through corporate actors. So very difficult period right now, and we can't not see that. So thank you for letting us know. Thank you.
And thank you very much to Agnès for joining us in the Youth and Leaders Summit 25. Your call to action, mobilization, I think is being heard. Resistance, of course. Thanks a lot, Agnès. Merci.